with the Graduate Research Meet 2024, organized by the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati. It gives me immense pleasure to start the event in the presence of our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Stanley Joni, International Affairs Editor, The Hindu, Professor K.V. Krishna, Dean Academic Affairs, Professor Priyanku Sharma, Professor and Head, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, faculty members, participants, and dear friends. In the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences here in IIT Guwahati, we are a multidisciplinary department, a center for research and teaching which comprise 11 different disciplines: archaeology, development studies, economics, English, geography, history, linguistics, philosophy, political science, psychology, and sociology. With various research interests and expertise, the department promotes interdisciplinary work in humanities and social sciences, offering projects, supervision, and fellowships aimed to attract students and researchers from diverse academic backgrounds. Therefore, we believe we are at a position to provide the best possible platform to host such an event. With this, may I now request Professor K.V. Krishna, Dean Academic Affairs IITG, Professor Priyanku Sharma, Professor Rakshi Bedmatta, Faculty Convener of GRM 2024, Amritesh Kumar Jha, the Student Convener, and Ronit Hazarika, Student Co-Convener, to take their seats on the dais. With this, may I please request our student convener for GRM 2024, Amritesh Kumar Jha, research scholar in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, to introduce the theme of this year's GRM.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amritesh, the student convener for this year's Graduate Research Meet, aka GRM. This year is special because it is the 10th edition of the GRM. On behalf of the organizing committee and the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, I welcome you all, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present here today. 10 years ago, in 2014, the idea of this meet was conceived by our department here at IIT Guwahati. GRM aims to bring together contemporary graduate students from different academic institutions of India to exchange and share their researches on different disciplines of humanities and social sciences. We have consistently tried to maintain a good academic standard, for which we are really grateful to you all. In the present scenario, where pertinent social issues are debated and discussed in a situation of highly biased social atmosphere, having a rigorous and holistic understanding seems all the way more crucial. GRM aims to provide this. In the past, we have explored themes like margins and peripheries in South Asia and humanities and social sciences in transitions, perspectives, exchanges, and translations, among many others. The theme for this year is power, movement, and memory. Its relevance is rooted in the fact that power manifests itself in various ways, impacting the movements and exchanges of everyday experiences. So, the meanings and identities of the present are shaped by the interplay of these two factors. Moreover, memory, both individual and collective, becomes a potent tool in cataloging these forces. Therefore, aligning with the theme, we look forward to listening to the keynote and valedictory addresses by Dr. Stanley Joni and Ms. Aanchal Malhotra respectively, along with the participants present here. Last year, we had received 298 abstract submissions, and this year, I am pleased to announce that we have received an overwhelming total of 502 abstracts. the selected papers, 56 participants will be presenting during these 2 days. We are grateful that each year we have been able to reach out to research scholars from all corners of the country, fostering scholarly engagement. Now, the GRM in making was a journey to remember. Without the help and support of fellow research scholars of the department, faculty members, office staffs, and the administration, the event seemed unachievable in the beginning. Honestly, can you imagine 6 long hours of discussion just to finalize the theme? Yes. We had to bring together 11 different disciplines under one overarching. Thereafter, 8 dozen different committees were formed to implement different tasks, from the abstract committee to finance, to logistics, to PR, to hall management, and to my favorite, and I think yours too, the food committee. Oh wait, I almost forgot. The email correspondence team and how their circadian rhythm went berserk. Well, on a serious note, all have worked relentlessly to show GRM 2024 the light of the day. Without you all, I wouldn't have been standing here delivering my speech today. Thank you. I once again welcome you all to GRM 2024. Over to you, Pastor.
Thank you so much, Amritesh. Moving on, I would now like to call upon Professor Rajshri Bedamatta, Faculty Convener for GRM 2024, to welcome the dignitaries on the dais. Thank you.
Thank you, Upasna. Professor Krishna, Professor Premku, Amritesh, Ronit, Dr. Stanley has joined us, and Anchal, my senior colleagues, Professor Rujyoti, Mrinal, my other colleagues from the department, participants, research scholars from the department, and my dear friends. Let me begin by congratulating Amritesh, Ronit, the various committee heads, the entire team of GRM 2024, and all the research scholars of our department for putting this wonderful event together. Amritesh sounded a little damp because he's tensed, but let us please have a big round of applause for all our research scholars for putting together a wonderful event. So this year we have representation from about more than 35 institutions and universities across India. And as Amritesh mentioned, that this is the 10th year of the GRM. This began in 2014 and we have only grown from strength to strength. We have received an overwhelming number of abstracts, and we made sure that this time we ensure participation when we have received full papers. And we received 56 full papers across many disciplines, across the humanities and the social sciences. And let us also have another round of applause for all the full paper writers among the research scholars. The research scholars, of course, are busy with their research work and finding time to write full papers for the graduate research meet. Faculty members of our department and other chairs are actually looking forward to the presentations. So thank you very much for your participation. Now let me also tell you that between September and October, there were a flurry of activities that were organized by our research scholars. They call it the pre-GRM event, and I don't know why they have not presented their pre-GRM events on the slide here. If I was them, I would have been showcasing them, but there are a number of events that they have carried out. I just want to name a few. We had an ethnographic research design practice and prospects workshop carried out by our research scholar Ajmal Rasak, and he did this workshop among many students. It was a success. We had Ayush Singhal, who was a LAMP fellow and a CMGGA fellow. He's also an independent social consultant now. He did a talk on early career in policy, governance and development, and this talk was also highly appreciated among the students. We had a talk on higher studies examining the local and the global by Jyotishman Mudiyar from the University of Chicago. He is a current PhD scholar, and that was also received very well among the students. Our alumni, Dr. Vikash Das, did an online workshop among the students from the field to the journals, highlighting on how we go from our field work to publications. That was a great success. We also, the highlight of the pre-GRM events was the workshop series, the writing series, and this was led by Jyotirmay Talukdar, writing fellow at Ashoka University. It was a one full day event and it was entirely coordinated by our team of GRM 2024 and the research scholars, and the participants tell us that they really learned a lot from this series. So again, another round of applause for the pre-GRM events. Now this time we have also requested our master's students for poster presentations, and unfortunately because this is the semester break and many of our students are out of campus, so we have just a few presentations for poster presentations. They are outside. Please encourage our master's students by going through their posters, and next year we will try to bring in more posters from our master's students. Apart from this, because this is the 10th edition of the GRM, we have a special announcement for our participants. We have a best paper award this time, and the chairs will be looking closely at your presentations and all the full papers. And let me also announce that we have a cash award of rupees 10,000 for the best paper award. So all the best to all the research scholars and who have visited us from all parts of India. I hope you have two fun-filled days, and I look forward to Amritesh and Ronit and the entire GRM team taking good care of you. And if they are not taking good care of you, please let us know. Okay? So thank you very much. Now may I request Priyanku to come.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have much to say because all of my preceding speakers have already talked about the department, talked about GRM. So I welcome you all here, and as it was said again and again, that this is the 10th year. 2014 we started GRM, and as you already know that ours is a very diverse kind of department with 10 different disciplines and 32 faculty members. In spite of that, we all came together in 2014 and started this exercise called GRM. In 2013, now that we are talking about numbers and also about memory here, so 2014 when we started it, then we received about 124 submissions. The next year it went up to 156. So the next year was 188, next year was 213, and lastly in 2018 it was 563 total submissions for GRM that we received, and that is exactly the time I stopped counting the number of submissions in GRM. This time I'm very glad to know that there are 502 submissions, and only a selection of those submissions are actually accepted for presentation, which tells a lot about the quality of this conference. After we started in 2014, over the last few years specifically, I meet a lot of faculty members, a lot of researchers in different parts of the country, and also some abroad also, who have told me that they were there in the first or the second or the third GRM. And it gives us immense pleasure to see that all the scholars who have attended GRM have achieved such good positions in their work and in their career. Again, I welcome you all. It's a bit early, I know that, but you know, we here the sun rises a bit early, and so we start our proceedings pretty early. Sorry about that. And over the next 2 days, I think you will all discuss a lot of things. You will all argue with each other, and I hope that you argue with each other because that is what we require at present. But as I always tell to everyone, that the main point is that even after a day of argument, a day of fighting with each other, go down and have a cup of tea with each other or a cup of coffee with each other. That is what matters at the end of the day. So thank you so much for coming here. enjoy the campus. If there is anything that we can do, please let us know. And again, I also welcome our keynote speaker and note speaker to the program. And I thank all the whole organizing committee, the students, all the faculty members associated with it. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. May I now request Professor K.V. Krishna to please say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, on behalf of the initiative, I warmly welcome every participant of this GRM. I'm glad to be here on this 10th edition, and congratulations to the organizing team, particularly the department, who have sort of like continuing this, and we are conducting this 10th meet. And I'm fortunate to be there on the 9th edition also, on this to welcome the participants. So, yeah, it's a great moment. We are continuing, and I was in fact asking last time that are you going to have some sort of proceedings for the 10th event? So, but it is, I'm very glad to know that you have got so much response of more than 500 submissions, and you have brought down some about 10% of those papers that you are coming up with. Of course, if you are able to sort of like compile and try to bring some sort of proceedings even internally, because in this electronic way of compiling the things is you don't have to put any cost and you don't have to put any publication. So maybe it will receive its own importance in due course of time, since you are continuing. I wish to see that yes, this meet will be a sort of like sets its legacy and trying in the future years to come, and there will be a lot of the way that it is continuing. I am very hopeful to see that this meet will be sort of like set as its own standards the future generations to participate and to discuss particularly in these areas. As I am told, like see, this is a multidisciplinary event already, and as the department HSS at IIT Guwahati, all our colleagues, they interact with other science and engineering disciplines, and a lot of us have been carried out in the institute. I am sure that the participants will be encouraged to even not only discuss with the department members, and you can go across and interact with other faculty members in the laboratories. You can visit. It's a beautiful campus. Your stay, I hope it will be memorable, and your interactions in this 2 days event, I am sure that you will sort of like enjoy and exchange your views. And for every problem in the institute, the first and foremost thing, which of course institute in the sense of the social problems that you get or any other issue, it is the first. The humanities and social science department has to come forward and talk about how that can be handled. So now in this kind of meet, you can exchange various ideas and see how we can take these things forward. Okay. So in these few words, I warmly welcome to the institute. On behalf of the institute, I wish a great success to this meet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. With this, may I now request Ronit Hazarika, Research Scholar and the co-convener of GRM 2024, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. With this, we come nearer to the end of our inaugural session. But before we move on to the next session, I must extend the thanks and gratitude of the student community of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, to Dr. Stanley Johnny, our keynote speaker and International Affairs Editor at The Hindu, who blessed us by being a part of GRM 2024. Thank you, sir. Our director, Professor Devendra Jalehal, who unfortunately could not grace us with his presence due to prior commitments. Professor K.V. Krishna, Dean of Academic Affairs, for taking time out of his busy schedule to join us here. Professor Priyanku Sharma, our head of department, who has stood fast by student initiatives like GRM as long as we, scholars and students, can remember. Professor Rajshri Vedamatta, our faculty convener, who helped us above and beyond her role. And of course, our participant speakers, who are now part of a 10-year-long tradition of academic deliberation and exchange. With this, I leave the dais to Upasana. Good morning and best of luck.
Thank you, Ronit. Now may I please request the dignitaries to take the seats with the audience.
Hello. In near, you ask someone, it is near the admin building, that auditorium, near the auditorium. You can ask someone. Near main auditorium, the hall number 2. Hall, no, hall number 2. Come directly to hall number 2.
Moving forward, we are elated to have with us Dr. Stanley Joni to deliver the keynote address. And for that, I request Professor Rohini Mokashi Punekar, Professor of English Literature in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, to chair the keynote session. I welcome you to take your seats on the dais. To introduce Dr. Stanley Joni. Dr. Joni is the International Affairs Editor with The Hindu, a PhD in International Studies from the Center for West Asian Studies, JNU, New Delhi. He has been writing on geopolitics and Indian foreign policy for over a decade and has reported from different parts of the world. He is a visiting professor of Kriya University, Sri City, Andhra Pradesh, an adjunct faculty member at Asian College of Journalism, Chennai, and a visiting fellow at Kerala University, Thiruvananthapuram. He is the author of the ISIS Caliphate, From Syria to the Doorsteps of India, 2018, and co-author of The Comrades and the Mullahs, China, Afghanistan, and the New Asian Geopolitics, 2022. His third book, Original Sin, Israel, Palestine, and the Revenge of Old West Asia, will be out soon. Thank you. Now may I request Professor Rohini Mokashi Punekar to kindly felicitate the speaker. Thank you, Amritesh. Thank you, ma'am. I now hand this session over to you.
Well, I'm a bit on my back foot, as it were, to introduce somebody who's been associated with the media, and as someone who has always had the Hindu at home, as growing up and even today, one looks forward to certain reports with a byline of certain names. And I don't know, with all due respect, I must say in the last few years, the Hindu has become a bit stodgy. It does not have the immediacy But nevertheless, the Hindu has to be taken and read every day because of the sheer kind of gamut of news that it sort of provides you. But amidst the rather, what shall I say, very deep and informative articles that seem to sort of, people the pages of the Hindu these days, there's one, there are some reports that one really looks forward to, and the name Stanley Johnny is one of them, and because of his dispatches and his reports from on international affairs from say the Middle East, especially on the Palestine and what's happening currently, but also because of what he's reported from the recent tumult in Sri Lanka as well as the Ukraine front. I mean, there are many fronts in the world today which are absolutely, what shall I say, completely unprecedented in the kind of, I mean, maybe a century ago we had this kind of situation, but today with all the development in the arms and the facilities that countries seem to have at the push of a button, this is really, really dangerous. And with this new development in the elections recently in the US, we really do not know what happens. So I'm sure all of us are very, very eagerly in anticipation, looking forward to what you have to say today. And I will not say anything further, and invite Stan from Delhi.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. And good morning, everybody. And thanks to the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Guwahati for having me here. I consider this as an honor. And as ma'am pointed out, we live in a very difficult world because, the kind of security destruction we are witnessing today, we haven't seen this in decades. Because on the one side, you have a proxy war in Ukraine between great powers, basically Russia and NATO. And then here in West Asia, Israel has been fighting on multiple fronts. It's been going on for the last 1 year. And you saw the collapse of the Syrian regime just yesterday. The government of Bashar al-Assad and this organization called HTS, which had Al-Qaeda links, is now in Damascus, and Donald Trump is returning as the President of the United States. So it's a very unpredictable situation, very chaotic atmosphere. I will focus on Israel-Palestine of all these topics which I just talked about. I'll speak for some time and then we will open it up for Q&A. I'm sure there will be questions. When we talk about Israel-Palestine, this is one of the longest and most complicated conflicts in international relations today. Because, we still don't have a solution to this. And you have seen since 1948, I'm taking 1948 because it was in 1948 when the State of Israel was created. And since 1948, you have seen multiple wars. 1948-49 war, 56 war, 67 war, 1982 war, 1978 Lebanon invasion, and then after that multiple attacks on Gaza. So you have seen multiple multiple wars. You have also seen multiple peace efforts like the Oslo, Camp David, Second Camp David, and a Maryland Conference, the Trump peace plan, Obama peace plan, the Arab Peace Initiative, etc., etc. But you still don't have a solution to the Palestine question, right? So this is also a very complicated situation. Why? Because practically the whole of historical Palestine is today controlled by the State of Israel, and which includes the West Bank and Gaza, which are Palestinian territories by the international law, according to the UN Security Council resolutions, but controlled by Israel, but the Palestinians living in those territories do not enjoy equal rights. And the Palestinians want their own state, and there is basically a consensus on the two-state solution, but how are you going to create a two-state solution? Because for a two-state solution, you need a border, you need a capital, you need to identify the right of return of the refugees, etc., and there is no consensus on any of these complicated issues. So you don't have a solution, right? So this remains the longest, perhaps one of the longest and most complicated conflicts of our times. And if I talk about, when you try to understand this Israel-Palestine issue, you need to look at it from both sides, both from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And when you do that, you can see that historically the role of memory in this movement and the movements championed by both sides to attain their political objectives. Because, if you talk about the Zionist movement, which led to the creation of the State of Israel, so basically, Israel was created in 1948, and prior to that, from the late 19th century, you had the Jewish migration from Europe to what was then called historical Palestine, which was part of the Ottoman Empire, right? So prior to that, because Jews have a biblical claim over the land of Jerusalem, because there was the United Kingdom of Israel. If you read Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, God promised the Jewish people the land of Canaan, which is around Jerusalem, right? And then, but there is no archaeological evidence or historical or archaeological evidence about the United Jewish Kingdom, but Jews, a large number of Jews were living in and around Jerusalem, and they were sacked multiple times from the city, historically. The Assyrian invasion, the Babylonian invasion, etc., and the Jews were dispersed from Jerusalem to different parts of the world. That's how the Jewish diaspora has been created. And if you look at the Jewish prayers, even from the medieval period, return to Zion, Zion as Jerusalem, is one of their key objectives. And in Europe, Jews faced persecution, right, because of anti-Semitism, which dates back in centuries. In 13th century, during the Black Death, Jews were rounded up and burned alive, even in Birmingham and London. You can see there were, in popular culture, literature, there were multiple examples from, Merchant of Venice to Godfather II, even Francis Ford Coppola's movie in Godfather, where you might recall a conversation between Michael Corleone, the Don, and Frank Pentangeli. And Frank is asking Michael that you want me to declare my loyalty before a Jew. Then Michael says that, Frank, my father did business with Haman Roth. Haman Roth is the Jewish villain from Miami. And then Frank says, your father did business with Haman Roth. Your father respected Haman Roth, but your father never trusted Haman Roth. This is from Godfather II. So, my point is that you can see this reflections of anti-Semitism in popular culture and in real life, which was predominant in Europe, and that exploded in Holocaust, and after that the Jews, even before that, when the persecution was there, from late 19th century onwards, Jews started migrating from Europe to Jerusalem. So it was Theodor Herzl, who was today considered as the spiritual founder of the State of Israel. It was Theodor Herzl who wrote this pamphlet called The Jewish State, basically arguing that Jews cannot assimilate into European societies because of anti-Semitism. And his thesis was that Jews should have their own homeland. So he was basically lobbying with the Ottoman Sultan because, Jerusalem, Zion is the place Jews wanted to go back to. That's where they believed they were expelled from. So the memory of Zion, the quest to go back to their homeland, that continued to drive political Zionism during this period. So on the one side, they were facing persecution in Europe, which was a material reality. And on the other side, they were driven by this collective memory of returning to their promised land, which is in Jerusalem. So Zionism, basically, it was Theodor Herzl who founded Zionism. So Herzl, during the early days, he met Kaiser, the German emperor, when Kaiser went to meet the Ottoman Sultan. And his demand was that Kaiser has to persuade Sultan to allow the Jews to settle in Palestine as a community. So the Ottoman Sultan said Jews can come and buy land and live here, but he won't let settlements. This was the position the Ottoman Sultan took at that time. And then Jews started migrating in groups, what they call aliyah. And they started migrating in the late 19th century, and in the early 20th century this picks up, you know. And so it was Herzl who founded the World Zionist Organization, which became the main vehicle of supporting or promoting Jewish migration from Europe, where Jews were fleeing persecution, and they went to Jerusalem, and then they were buying up land, setting up communities, and starting a new life, when Jerusalem was part of the Ottoman Empire. But in the First World War, the Ottomans were defeated, and the British General Allenby entered Jerusalem, and after that, Palestine became a British colony, basically the mandated Palestine. And during the war, basically during the First World War, Britain wanted the support of the world Jewry in Europe. So in 1917, the British government promised the Zionist organization that if they win the war, they will support the creation of a national homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. So this is what they promised. It is called the Balfour Declaration in 1970, more than 100 years ago. And the British had also promised to the Arabs that they would give independence to Arabs if they revolted against the Ottomans. And then what the British did was to have a secret agreement with the French to divide up the Middle East or West Asia, whatever you want to call it, between themselves once they win the war. So they finally what they did was that they took over Palestine. Palestine became a British colony. They decided to, they gave Syria and Lebanon to the French. If you want to understand the problem Syria and Lebanon are facing today, you need to actually go back to the mandate. And then they gave Transjordan to the Arabs, because Jordan, the king of Jordan, King Abdullah, is basically a Saudi Arab. He's not a Jordanian. He came from Hijaz. Because since the British had promised to the Arabs homeland for the Arabs, what they did, they gave Jordan, which was part of the Ottoman Syria, to the Hashemite family, who migrated from Hijaz and established their own kingdom. So this is how the British divided the region. So Palestine now becomes a British colony. And during the interwar period, you also saw growing persecution, Holocaust, massacre of Jews in Europe, which means the migration picks up. And Europeans, basically once the war was over, they wanted to find a solution to the Jewish question. What is the Jewish question? The Jewish question is that how will you address the historical injustices the Jewish people had suffered in Europe? So basically there was this, especially from the Western world, they supported the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. So by the time the war was over, you had a sizable Jewish community in Palestine. And they had a parallel government, which used to be called the Jewish Agency. And they had their own militia groups, Haganah and Irgun. And their demand was that, and it was led by David Ben-Gurion, who became the first Prime Minister of the State of Israel. And their main demand was the creation of Israel, right? So, Palestine remained the British colony from 1921 until 1948. So 1948, after the Second World War was over, Britain went to the United Nations and told them that we don't want to continue the mandate because of the reasons which we know, because the British Empire had been weakened by the war. Britain wanted to reduce their influence in the region. So Britain wanted to exit the mandate. So the mandate was supposed to expire on May 15th, 1948. And on May 14th, basically the Jewish Agency and David Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel. So this was the culmination of, if you look at it from the Zionist point of view, from the Jewish point of view, the creation of the State of Israel was the culmination of this decades-long movement which started in the late 19th century. Because the political objective of the movement, the political objective of Zionism is that, assimilation of the Jewish people into European societies was not a practical solution. And that is a historically valid argument because of the persecution they faced in Europe. And the solution they put forward was to create a state for the Jewish people. That is the only solution that they thought. And there were multiple options, like for example, when Lloyd George was the Prime Minister of Britain, Britain had actually made a proposal of creating a Jewish state in Uganda. And the World Zionist Conference had actually accepted the proposal, you know. So there were multiple, and they were also considering creating a Jewish state in Argentina. So there were multiple options being considered, but Jerusalem is the place where the Jews had their biblical claim, their historical affinity, and their collective memory had actually tied them to Jerusalem. And that is also, and you know, during the time of the Ottoman period, actually it was Palestine that welcomed the Jewish immigration also, not the other parts of the world where they continued to face persecution. So by the time the war was over, you had hundreds of thousands Jews living in Palestine with, you know, their own institutions, including statelets. So that eventually led to basically the creation of the State of Israel, because before on May 14th, a day ahead of the expiry of the mandate, David Ben-Gurion would declare the State of Israel, and immediately after that, you know, the Arabs will declare war against the new state, because there was a UN partition plan before this. Once Britain informed the United Nations, the newly created United Nations, that they don't want to continue the mandate, what the UN did was to set up a committee, to come up with a proposal to resolve this problem. Because by the time the war was over, Second World War was over, see, Britain is the colonial master of Palestine. Britain wanted to leave Palestine, but now you have two claimants to the land of Palestine. One is the local population, and the other is the Jewish agency. And the Jewish agency wanted a Jewish homeland, but the Arabs living in the region did not want to accept any partition of Palestine. They wanted freedom. They wanted Britain to leave and hand over the powers of the region to them. So this was the major dichotomy here. So the UN sets up a committee, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, and the UNSCOP would come up with this proposal of dividing Palestine into three. One Arab state, which would basically comprise some 45% of historical Palestine, one Jewish state, roughly 54% of Palestine, and then Jerusalem to remain an international city. This was put to vote in the UN General Assembly, and this was passed in the UN General Assembly, and this was voted out mainly by Arab countries, plus India. India was the only non-Arab country that basically voted against the partition plan. But this did not make it to the UN Security Council because of the strong protest by the Arab countries, because the Arab position was that they did not want to divide or partition Palestine. This was the same position India had also taken, because India said that having suffered through the horrors of partition, India would not support the partition of Palestine. India instead supported a federal solution in which one single state where Jews, Arabs, and Christians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Christians and Muslims are Arabs. When three communities live together, this is the position. This is the federal plan had proposed at that time. So the UN General Assembly had passed the partition plan, but the UN Security Council did not even take it up. But Britain was certain that they wanted to expire the mandate. So before Britain exited, what happened was the creation of Israel was unilaterally declared. And it was also immediately after that, after 11 minutes after the creation of Israel was declared, the United States would offer recognition to the new state. And within a few days, the Soviet Union will also do the same thing. This was one of the rarest examples during the Cold War, where both the Americans and the Soviets were on the same side when it came to the creation of Israel, because Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union, and immediately after Israel was created, Stalin gave his recognition. The Americans did the same thing. So Israel had the international recognition. We Indians also recognized the state of Israel, but we did not establish full diplomatic relationship with Israel, which came only in 1992, after the end of the Cold War. Right? So you now have a state, right? So Jews, basically, if you look at it from the point of view of political Zionism, they finally got a homeland for themselves, right? they returned to the Zion. Now they have a full state with international recognition. And this state was basically, limited to, this was not in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem were beyond its limits. But in the rest of the Palestinian territories, if you look at historical Palestine, the new Israeli state came up. And the problem is that when the state of Israel was created, some 750,000 Palestinians were thrown out of their homes. So they immediately became refugees. So there were different accounts in history where Jews were being expelled from their homes, right? That's how you had the Jewish diaspora. And that's why this collective memory of driving Jews back to the Zion took shape, that fueled their movement. So now you are seeing the same thing happening with regard to the Palestinians. 7.5 lakh Palestinians were thrown out of their homes when the new state of Israel was created. And Israel had taken over half of Jerusalem and much of northern Palestine, which even according to the UN Security Plan was given to the Palestinians. These were Arab cities. So that led to mass expulsion of the Palestinian Arabs, who still remain refugees. So if you go and check the international laws and Geneva Convention, they have the right to return, but they still remain refugees. So here, Palestinians become homeless. They are thrown out of their homes. Now you have the state of Israel, but you don't have a state of Palestine in 1948 and 1949, right? And the rest of Palestine were occupied by two Arab countries. So it was not immediately occupied by Israel. So in 1948-49 war, Israel had captured, Israel had captured the Jewish cities, as well as half of Jerusalem, and north of Palestine, and the West Bank and Gaza, which were again predominantly Arab regions, were taken over by Jordan and Egypt respectively. So Jordan took the West Bank. West Bank is basically on the western bank of the Jordan River. If you look at the map, so East Jordan and then you have the West Bank. So East Jordan is what today's Jordan is, which used to be called Transjordan. And then the Jordanians took over the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as while the Egyptians took over the Gaza Strip, where the war is today taking place. And then in 1967, in the second major Arab-Israel war, which is also called the Six-Day War, which means in 6 days, Israel defeated all its neighbors. On the first day, it destroyed the Egyptian Air Force. On the second day, it practically defeated the Jordanian ground force. And on the third day, it defeated the Syrians. So by the end of the 6th day, Israel had practically defeated all its neighbors. And then it captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem from the Jordanians. It captured Gaza from the Egyptians, Gaza and Sinai Peninsula from the Egyptians, and it captured Golan Heights from the Syrians. Of all these territories, it still captures all these territories except for the Sinai Peninsula, which returned to the Egyptians in 1979. So, what happened in 1967 was that the whole of historical Palestine is now controlled by Israel, including West Bank and Gaza Strip. And it still controls both these territories, right? And the Golan Heights is still with Israel. So you must have seen the story that yesterday that after the Syrian government fell, Israel is now moving troops to the Golan to take over the Syrian Golan Heights, basically, because there is nobody to resist. So 1967, the whole of historical Palestine came under Israel's control. But there is this question, right? Because West Bank and Gaza are predominantly Palestinian population. What are you going to do about them? And you have 7.5 Palestinian refugees living in different parts of the world, in West Asia as well as the rest of the world. So they want to return to their homes. But if they return to their homes, which is modern day Israel, Israel's demographics will change. And Israel will not accept that because Israel is essentially a Jewish state. That Jewish identity is central to the creation of Israel state. So they would not like this 7.5 lakh Palestinians and their descendants to return to their homes. So this also remains a very touchy issue when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? So, 1967, the whole of Palestine is under Israel's control, but the question is, what are you going to do with the Palestinian people? You know, are they going to give them equal rights, or are they going to give them, are you going to let them create their own state? This is the question. So Israel doesn't want to basically give them equal rights, but then you can see that in the 1970s and the 1980s, the movement for two-state solution becomes very strong. And the Palestinians on the other side, like the same way memory drove Jews to build their own movement, to create their own state. Palestinians on the other side, you know, some of them were driven out, they never had their statehood, they were now living under the occupation. What drove them was their collective memory, their claim towards their own land and their quest for nationhood. This is what drove the Palestinian movement as well. So in the 1960s, you had the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was led by Yasser Arafat. And in the 1970s, especially after the 1973 war between Israel and Egypt, the Yom Kippur War, in which Israel was taken aback, basically because Egypt launched a surprise attack. Told you in 1967, Israel had practically defeated all the Arab armies, and Israel thought that it enjoyed deterrence against its neighbors. But in 1973, Egyptians launched a surprise attack, which basically took the Israelis by surprise. And then at the end of the war, yes, Israel was initially pushed out of Sinai Peninsula, but then Israel moved to the Americans. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir then said that if we are going down, we will bring the entire region down, which was a real threat of using nuclear weapons. And the Americans carried out one of the largest, heaviest airlifts in the history of weapons to the Israelis. And with US supplies, Israel will push the Egyptians back. But still, the Yom Kippur War, which broke out exactly 51 years ago, in 1973, remains a very problematic incident in Israel's history. And that also finished off the political career of Golda Meir, and it brought the political hegemony of the Labour Party to an end in Israel after the Yom Kippur War. But then the Israelis realized that they need to make peace with Egypt, because despite their 1967 victory, Egypt remains a potent threat. Right? So they were open to make a deal with the Egyptians, and they agreed to return the Sinai Peninsula back to the Egyptians, and in return for Egypt's recognition of the state of Israel. So in 1978, in the Camp David Agreement, Egypt became the first Arab country to recognize the state of Israel. So this is interesting because in 1969, 2 years after the war, in Khartoum in Sudan, all the Arab countries assembled, and they passed this 3-no resolution. No talks with Israel, no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel. And Egypt led the talks, basically. And Egypt became the first Arab country to recognize Israel. Because Egypt wanted to make peace with Israel, Egypt wanted Sinai Peninsula back, its own territory, back. Anwar Sadat was the Egyptian president. But Sadat wanted to give something to the Palestinians because, the whole Egyptian foreign policy based on its opposition towards the Israelis and its support for the Palestinians. So-called support for the Palestinians. So he wanted something for the Palestinians. So he said that Israel has to commit to the creation of a Palestinian state. To which Israel said no, but still, as part of some agreement, they signed the framework for peace agreement as part of the Camp David agreement. The framework for the peace, Israel promised that they would allow the creation of a provisional Palestinian government in West Bank and Gaza. So this is the first time Israel is recognizing Palestinian nationalism. So before that, no. Israel's argument was that, Golda Meir famously said in 1969 that there is no such thing as Palestine. The Israeli Prime Minister said 1969. But in 1979, you see after the war, and when Egyptians as well as Jimmy Carter was the American president, Carter was also putting pressure on the Israelis. And in 1979, Israel signed the Framework for Peace Agreement, in which they accepted that they would respect the creation of a provisional government in the occupied territories. But this provisional government would be formed only in 1994, much later, after the Oslo Agreement was signed. So in 1993, the Oslo Agreement was signed. So after the Oslo Agreement, you have the provisional government in Palestine, which is the Palestinian Authority, which still exists in the West Bank. And Abu Mazen is the president of the Palestinian Authority. But Palestinian Authority practically has authority. It is a Palestinian non-authority. Because if you go to the West Bank, I've been to West Bank a couple of times. If you go to the West Bank, West Bank is basically militarily occupied by the Israelis, and the Palestinian cities are actually cordoned off by Israeli troops. You can't move from one place to the other without going through the Israeli checkpoints. So Palestinian Authority has some civil responsibilities, that's it. Everything else is controlled by the Israelis. But the Palestinian Authority came into existence in 1993 as part of the Oslo Agreement. What you are seeing here is that after the Israelis captured the whole of Palestine in 1967, initially they denied that there is anything called the Palestine, but then eventually they accepted that they accepted the two-state solution. When we talk about two-state solution, the point is that one state is already there, right? State of Israel is already there. It was created in 1948. So when we talk about two-state solution, what it implies is that you need to create a sovereign independent Palestinian state. And in the 1990s, two-state solution was pretty popular. Everybody accepted two-state solution, including the Israelis. So Oslo Agreement was signed by the Labour Party. Yitzhak Rabin was the Prime Minister at that time. And the promise of Oslo was that you first create the Palestinian Authority, you create Palestinian National Assembly, and then you continue to hold talks between two sides, which would eventually lead to the creation of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state. This was the promise of the Oslo process. But after Oslo, two things happened. One, Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist in 1995. So the Prime Minister who signed Oslo was assassinated. Two, in 1988, Hamas had been formed in Gaza, predominantly in Gaza. So you have two Palestinian factions now. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, that accepted the two-state solution, but Hamas did not accept the two-state solution. Hamas was against Oslo. Hamas's point of view is that the whole of historical Palestine, which includes the state of Israel, has to be liberated, quote unquote. So Hamas was also committed to the destruction of the state of Israel if you read Hamas's charter. And Hamas, unlike PLO is predominantly a secular organization which is fashioned after the Third World insurgencies, but Hamas is an Islamist organization, right? And Hamas, which was opposed to the Oslo process, started suicide bombing in Israel proper in the early 1990s. And it actually picked up in the early 2000s. And after Rabin's assassination, you had Benjamin Netanyahu as the prime minister. In the first election Israel had, after Rabin was assassinated, Netanyahu became prime minister. And Netanyahu had always been non-committal to two-state solution. He has said on record that there won't be any Palestinian state on my watch. He has said that, right? So, on the one side you have Netanyahu, and on the other side you have Hamas. And Hamas started a series of suicide attacks, and Netanyahu said that Yasser Arafat is not able to control his own organization, his own factions. Hamas is a different faction. It was not part of the PLO, but still. And then, as long as the Palestinian terrorism continues, Israel said that it can't take talks on the two-state solution forward, right? So, you had a major bottleneck here with extremists coming to the fore on both sides. And then what happened eventually was that the two-state solution, basically we saw that two-state solution collapsing because nobody today talks about the two-state solution. Because on the Israeli side, Israel's politics has clearly shifted to the right, whether it is Netanyahu, and now Netanyahu's coalition partners are far-right political factions, including Smotrich or Itamar Ben-Gvir, and they are talking about a greater Israel today. Forget about two-state solution. And the Israeli Prime Minister, as I told you, has repeatedly said that no Palestinian state on my watch. You listen to other Israeli politicians, for example, Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli Prime Minister, has also recently he said no, there can't be a Palestinian state because that violates Israeli security. So on the Israeli side, if you look at the Israeli side today, I don't see any mainstream politician that is seriously supporting a two-state solution. And on the Palestinian side, the Palestinian resistance is very weak because it's, first of all, it's divided. The West Bank is controlled by Fatah, which is Yasser Arafat's party. Arafat died in 2004. 2004. And now Abu Mazen is the leader of Fatah party. So West Bank is controlled by Fatah and Gaza is controlled by, it was controlled by Hamas. So the Palestinian resistance is practically divided. And Fatah, to be frank, is very unpopular even among Palestinians. And the last elections Palestinian territories had, Hamas won. This was in 2006. And Hamas formed a government. The government was dissolved by Abu Mazen. That led to an internal strife, civil conflict, even among the Palestinian factions. So you don't have a united Palestinian leadership on the one side, and on the other side you have Israelis that have turned completely right. So this dichotomy is always there. And of late, what you are seeing is that, especially after the October 7 attack. October 7 attack was carried out by Hamas. So Hamas was controlling Gaza from 2007 onwards. So Gaza it's a small strip of territory on the Mediterranean coast. And Gaza and West Bank do not have any geographical contiguity. If you look at the map, you can see Gaza is sandwiched between Israel proper and the Mediterranean Sea. And West Bank is on the other side between Jordan River and Israel proper. And Gaza was controlled by Hamas. And Hamas carried out this attack on October 7, cross-border attack in which some 1,200 people were killed, most of them were civilians. And after that, Israel launched its retaliatory war, which is still going on. And in Israel's war, 44,000 Palestinians have been killed, and a vast majority of them are women and children. They are non-combatants, and the whole of Gaza has been destroyed. Practically the whole of Gaza has been destroyed. So I was on the Gaza border in April last year, after the war happened. So we couldn't enter Gaza. Israel is not letting journalists, independent journalists go into Gaza. But you can go to Israel. You can go to Israel and report from there. So I was there on Gaza. I was there on Gaza. I was also there on the Lebanese border, where the war was going on between Israel and Hezbollah. So Gaza, and we were talking to journalists, Israeli journalists and Israeli security officials. Security officials will give a different perspective, of course. But Israeli journalists were saying that there was, mainly in northern Gaza, there was not a single building standing that is not controlled by the Israeli troops. So the refugees are living in makeshift shelters or in UN-run schools or hospitals, and even those schools and hospitals are being bombed. So Gaza has been practically destroyed. The entire population of Gaza has been displaced. That is 2.3 million people, and 44,000 people were killed. So you see this kind of a war going on in Gaza over the past 1 year, 13 months. So, if you look at these incidents from the Palestinian point of view, see 750,000 Palestinians became refugees in 1948. And the Palestinians immediately after that, they became, they got trapped in two countries, basically in three countries. One is Israel, the other is Jordan, and the other is Egypt. And in 1967, Israel had taken over the whole of Palestine, but the Palestinians continued to live under occupation. Because you had, basically, if you want to address this problem, it could be addressed in two ways. One is to give equal rights to the Palestinians living in the whole region, which means they should be allowed to vote. They should be allowed to work freely. They should be allowed to move freely. They should enjoy the equal political freedoms, which they don't. So the second option is to let them create their own state so that they can build their institutions. That is also not happening, right? So as of now, what you are witnessing is that the occupation is continuing, and then you have multiple conflicts over the past few decades. What the Palestinians are trying to do now, nobody is talking about a two-state solution. Nobody from the Israeli political class. You have the international support for two-state solution, but even if you want to create a two-state solution, what should be the border of a future Palestinian state? There is no consensus about it. The Palestinians say that the West Bank is Jerusalem, and Gaza should be the future, should make up the future Palestinian state. But the Israelis are non-committal at this point of time. Because if you talk to Israelis now, they say that two-state solution is already there because the second state was Jordan. The Palestinians can go to Jordan or Egypt. So many Israelis, even Israeli academics say this today because they don't want to give up their control over West Bank or Gaza. And in the West Bank, you have now 700,000 Jews living in the West Bank. So imagine, even if as part of some future deal, if Israel has to give up its control over the West Bank, what Israel is going to do about the 700,000 Jews living in the West Bank? Which Israeli prime minister is going to pull them back? That will be the end of their political career. So, and the settlers now, the 700,000 Israelis living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, they are now a very powerful political movement. For example, these two ministers in Netanyahu's government, Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, they were coming from the settler community. They have a very strong hold over the Israeli government because Israel's government, if you look at Israel's political makeup, no party will ever get majority in Israel. So Netanyahu's government, out of the 120 members in the Knesset, Israeli parliament, Netanyahu's party has 41 members and the 19 members are coming from the opposition groups. So it's always a coalition government. And in Israel today, it's Netanyahu's allies are farther right in the spectrum, basically. So none of them are going to accept a two-state solution. So you don't see any, solution on the horizon. So that is one thing. So the Palestinians on the other side, they continue to push for their own statehood. As I said, they are divided. They have different political ideologies. Then one is basically an extremist ideology. But on the other side, the PLO has been pushing for two states for a long period of time, but it's not happening. So what the Palestinians are, and the Israeli leadership today says that they don't even acknowledge the existence of the Palestinian national identity. That is also a problem. So if you look at it from the Palestinian point of view, what drives them again is their collective memory of their rights, their claims towards this land, and their quest for the creation of a Palestinian state. That's what is driving them as well. So internationally speaking, yes, there is, if you go and check the UN General Assembly resolutions, especially even the resolutions that were passed after the October 7 attack, the international public opinion is largely in favor of creating a Palestinian state. So there were 6 resolutions at the UN General Assembly after the war, and all of them were passed. All of them were in favor of Israel, and India supported 4 of those resolutions. So including the Palestinian right to self-determination, and another resolution called for Israel to end its settlements in the West Bank. Another one asked Israel to pull back from Syria's Golan Heights. And another one called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. These are the resolutions India voted in favor of at the UN General Assembly. So the international public opinion, if you look at the UN General Assembly, is largely in favor of the Palestinians. But why still there is not even a ceasefire? That's because Israel has this unconditional support from the United States. And the United States, as long as you have the support of the United States, you can practically violate international laws because the United States is the world's most powerful country. It is the world's largest economy, largest military, and it has enormous political influence over international institutions. One example you can look at the Russia-Ukraine war and Israel's war on Palestinian to get the perspective right. Because the Russia-Ukrainian war has been going on for almost 3 years now. There is the United States was leading an international coalition against the Russians. Right? Ukraine has been supplied with the world's most advanced weapons. And there are sanctions on Russia. And even the countries who did not join sanctions, including India, came under a lot of pressure from the West. And the Indians are even accused of funding Putin's war just because India did not join the sanctions. So you have this large-scale international attempt, to drive a movement against the Russians in Ukraine, which is fine. I have no problem with that because if you talk about the Ukrainian war, the Russians are the aggressors. So So this is the US response. But if you look at the total number of civilians killed in the Russia-Ukrainian war on both sides over the last 3 years, according to the United Nations, that is roughly 10,000. And the 10,000 is huge, there is no doubt about it, right? But to understand the magnitude of the conflict that's happening in West Asia, in 12 months, you had 44,000 people killed in Gaza, of which a vast majority of them women and children. And what response you see from the world? Nothing. And the world's great powers, the biggest powers, are not even supporting a ceasefire. Right? So this is the reality we are living in. I know the time is up. So thank you very much. Yeah, it's okay. So that's what I wanted to tell you. So memory played an important role on both sides, on both Jews and Israelis. And in the case of the Zionist movement, they had the state of Israel. And I'm not living in any illusion. I'm not someone who says that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, etc., etc. Don't get me wrong. Israel is a reality. And Israel has, like any other international actor, Israel has its rights. It has its right to exist. It has its right to defend itself, etc., etc. But this is what's happening in Gaza has nothing to do with defending itself. What happens in Gaza is a disastrous war. And the Palestinians on the other side also have the same rights. And there is a large-scale consensus internationally that the state of Palestine has to be created. So if you want to find a solution to this crisis, there are only two ways. One is to give equal rights to the Palestinians living in Greater Israel. But if you are not willing to do that, what you have to do is to create an independent sovereign Palestinian state. But if you are not willing to do either of it, then there is a problem that will lead to conflicts. And that's the conflict we are witnessing today. Thank you very much.